And now it gives me great pleasure to move to our second panel. The topic title is How do organizations and societies that follow the quality of life look like? That is, and what is at stake for those who are left behind? So let me invite Lionel Zinsou to come up to the stage. Hi, Lionel. Lionel is CEO of PAI Partners, a French private equity firm. In the past, he worked as an economist for the United Nations Development Program and also as special advisor to the President of Benin in Africa, where he has roots. And I could see him throughout the panel nodding, so he must be in agreement with what has been said before. Please welcome Lionel. Ron Oswald has been General Secretary of the International Union of Food since 1997, representing 10 million workers from 127 countries. He has been a union member since he worked as a baggage handler at Heathrow Airport in 1969. That's when they were good. Under his stewardship, the IUF has been recognized by several global companies, including Sodexo. Please welcome Ron. And Professor Sattar Ranaway, who is CEO of the Center for Executive Education in Singapore and a member of the Board of Trustees for the International Professional Managers Association. He has more than 30 years of international business management experience, including executive coaching, group facilitation, how am I doing? Okay. And leadership development. Please welcome Ron. And finally, we have a new addition to our panel, Erika Jørgensen, who is the director of the UN World Food Program in New York and has had 3 decades of experience working with humanitarian issues in Iraq, in South Africa, in the Balkans, and most recently assisted the UN for Ebola emergency response in West Africa. Please welcome Erika. Thank you all very much for being here. Lionel, let me start with you, because as a private equity investor with a very atypical approach, you have a lot to teach us about how all these issues figure into the cost and financial equation, which is so often used as the excuse for not implementing them.
Yes, you are right. It's an excuse which is not acceptable anymore by our clients. As a private equity company, we have to deploy money which is not our money. We borrow this money for 10 years, 12 years. Then we grow companies, we buy companies, we resell companies. But it is not our money, it's not our capital. So we have to report to somebody. And who is this somebody? This somebody is made of the clients of life insurance companies. Those clients, they have now very precise demands in terms of what they want to be achieved with their capital. They are pensioners of major pension funds across the world. Not only state pension funds in the USA, but for instance, African pension funds. It's not that well known that you have $500 billion today in African pension funds. Clearly, an African pensioner of South Africa, for instance, Kenya and so on, has very precise wills, values, and demands for what we make with their money. Same for sovereign funds. At the end, our final end client is a citizen in a country where a sovereign fund is asking us to deploy their money. And post-crisis, it has become very, very precise that profitability without sustainability or profitability without responsibility was not an option. So the previous behavior of deploying money to reach a profit, whatever the consequences on industrial relations, environment, quality of governance, this was over. This has just vanished with the crisis. So in the last 5-6 years, we had, I think, a real progress, which is obvious through some UN initiatives, for instance, the principles of responsible investments, but that is a charter you sign. It's not exactly a regulation, it's an international initiative. We are not regulated for really implementing responsible policies. Our regulations, the set of regulations is not about that. What is regulating our industry today is the end client. It is the one who is prepared to give us $100 through a life insurance company to make something decent with this money. And we are regulated by the clients. And we have raised recently across the world one of the large funds in Europe, sort of $4 billion. We would have probably get 1/3 of that if we had not been in a position to say we have implemented as much as we could, but we can document it, policies for private equity investment to be responsible. And here are the attempts, the trials, I mean, we are modest, but we can say, we can document our efforts. This is totally new, I think, in our industry, but it's an important change. And private equity is not very popular and absolutely not known for what I'm just explaining. If it had been the case, I think that Mitt Romney would be the president of the United States, but it has not happened. Strangely enough, in developing countries or emerging countries, private equity is far more popular because we bring a few things which are also important for quality of life, which is professionalism, which is capital, which is the need of capital, which is immense for emerging and developing countries. Because the discussion we have here is quite typical of rich countries. But personally, as an African, my question is not yet necessarily in Benin, for everything I do as a citizen, what will be the quality of life? Because we have spoken of things which are, how do you improve the quality of life of the happiest people in the world? And they could be even happier. We have a problem to protect life against death in many countries of Africa. And I admire a lot what has been done by the UN system in West Africa to try and master the Ebola crisis. We have first to protect life against death. And yes, improve, but to improve the quality of life of the bottom billion, the bottom billion, the ones who are excluded. And remember, in my continent, we have sort of 400 million people below the level of extreme poverty, which for quality of life is not an excellent position to be in. 400 million. It's less than the 600 million which are beyond, which is the very good news, and we can enter in quality of life problematics. But 400 million, it's more, the number of very, very poor, it's more than the total population of Africa in the 60s when we became independent, when the total population of Africa was 300 million. So we have more poor than total population 50 years ago. Is it a huge success for protection of life against death? I'm not sure. And in the corporate world, we have to make an immense effort to finance a faster development, taking into account the fact that we have first to protect life and then to improve life. But as we are not the happiest today, and not the richest, as you have noticed, we are the most optimistic. because we think it's difficult to live a worse life, so it will be better tomorrow. And if we can contribute to that as corporate leaders, it's absolutely essential. Entering in problematics such that we can come next year in this conference saying, we share the problem of the richest countries.
Thank you so much, Lionel. Ron, given what Lionel said, that in fact it's becoming no longer acceptable to not take this criteria into account when investing. Obviously, this is not your experience with all corporations that you deal with or all multinational companies that you deal with. So what is your experience in terms of changes in how these companies address quality of life issues and work to improve them for their workers?
Thank you. I think, first of all, I'm more than happy for people to know that I was a baggage handler in 1969, because the chances of meeting somebody who lost their bag at that time is diminishing with time, so I feel a little safer. But on a serious note, I think actually very much to follow on, this conference I think is interesting because in a way the world looks to people a little bit depending on where they're looking at it from. And the kind of people that we represent are food workers, agricultural workers, the poorest of the poor who can often not feed themselves and their families even though they have to feed the world, and service workers, the workers like those workers in Sodexo. Yesterday we heard, I think quite rightly, an appreciation of the staff of this hotel. You know, people in this hotel are unionized, and as a result of their being a member of a New York union, they're a member of the IUF. They earn over $28 an hour, which accumulates to something between $61,000 and $71,000 a year. The minimum wage in New York is $8.75, which accumulates to about $18,000 a year. So if you're talking to our members about quality of life issues, I suspect you'll have a different conversation with those workers who are getting up to a decent income and those who are trying to survive on $18,000 a year. They're actually doing it mainly by working at least 2 or 3 jobs. I remember a cartoon during Clinton's administration where he was speaking in a venue very much like this, saying that his administration had created 3 million new jobs. And the person who was pouring water working at that hotel said to his friend, and I have 3 of them. That is the reality for people on minimum wage in one of the richest cities in the world. So I think we have to be careful about quality of life discussions, very much like we would have to be in Africa. But for those workers who are on minimum wage, really they're about surviving. You know, quality of life isn't yet on their agenda. And I think that's a challenge in a country that's as wealthy as this, but it's a challenge in many countries. But it's not just the difference in income that determines their view on quality of life issues. You know, the truth is, and this may not be comfortable for everybody here, the truth is there is also a rights difference there. The workers at this hotel have been able to exercise one of their human rights. You know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, people may be surprised to know, contains an Article 23, which says you can join a union. So they've exercised their rights. People on minimum wage cannot. They don't have access to those rights. So there is a rights deficit, and I think the challenge to companies in general is, do they want to be party to that rights deficit, or do they want to overcome that rights deficit? And some of the inequalities are even worse. A company that I won't name because we're not in the name and shame period of this, with this company, we're talking to them.
Why not?
Because we're talking to them, and I think it's fair that we give them a chance to do something right. On behalf of some workers in India. This is not so uncommon, but we figured out that the workers we were representing in India, in order to earn the income of the CEO, and I'm sorry, would have to work for 14,400 years. So an even more extreme form of inequality. For those Indian workers, a quality of life discussion makes little sense at this point. They're trying to survive. So what can a company like Sodexo, with, frankly, moving up towards 500,000 workers, 419,000, I think, at present, employees, a huge potential with a huge footprint. What can they do? Well, all companies today say that they recognize their workers have rights. But you know, I always smile at that statement, because my question to them is immediately this: as opposed to what? That they don't? That's not a discussion. They have rights. The question is, how do they access those rights? And I think too many obstructions are placed before workers who want to have a better life, want to fight their way to better incomes. Too many obstructions are put in front of them, and too many of them may have those rights, but their access to them are denied through a whole range of different forces. Sodexo, I have to say, has taken a different path. And 4 years ago with us, they signed an agreement which didn't simply acknowledge that Sodexo workers have rights. That's somewhat arrogant, actually, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not something companies decide to take on board or not. The word universal is actually quite important. They signed an agreement with us that Sodexo workers would have mechanisms to access rights. And I would say to other companies, and we do this with some other companies, that the way forward is not to have us have to drag you kicking and screaming, naming and shaming, but actually sit down and think about what in your company gets in the way of people accessing their rights, and what you can do, as Sodexo has done under Michel's leadership, what you can do to build mechanisms that at the very least deals with the inequity of rights. It won't solve the income problems, but it will deal with the inequity of rights, and it will deal with it quite straightforwardly. So in our sector, a number of major companies are now doing that with us, and that's a very positive sign. Thank you.
So, Ron, I would love to actually consider that it's not either or. That you raised an incredibly important issue, which is that for many people, millions of people around the world, the discussion we've been having so far may be considered a luxury because their lives are about survival. But I would like to challenge that view, because in the same way that you talk about dealing with inequities being a universal human right, I think we're also dealing with a universal truth that connecting with our own sense of well-being, resilience, strength, wisdom, and ability to give also makes us more effective at surviving any situation, and also makes leaders more likely to make the changes you want, because they're more connected with their own sense of compassion and common humanity. So I would love us to see these as parallel tracks, rather than we'll first make sure you're surviving and then we'll deal with your quality of life, because in my experience, these questions of inner resilience make a huge difference in both in how leaders act and also how people in the circumstances that you and Lionel described react. So I'd love you to address that.
Very briefly, I think that, you know, but the fact is, Arianna, the quality of life for some is life. That is what they aspire to, and that's their first objective. And of course, within that, there is the context of family, even in the poorest circumstances, and there are many issues in there. But if I were to say to some of our members, we want to talk to you about quality of life, they would look at me and say, well, can we have a life first, and then we'll look at the quality of that life. At the top end, in terms of corporate leaders, you know, I think you have a real challenge as corporate leaders. First of all, in a company that size, and I say this with the greatest of respect, there is no way that you know what's going on in your company all the time, everywhere. No company can say with their hand on their heart that they are sure that their managements everywhere in the world are doing the right thing. It simply is not possible. That's not the question. The question to a company is not whether you do or don't do the right thing. That's a silly question. Things go wrong. Managers go rogue. Local cultures set standards which are so low that the company management believes it can lower itself to that standard. That's not the question. The question is, what do you do when somebody, sometimes us, tells you that that's happening? And there, I think corporate leadership has to step in and take a role. And there we've seen some very good examples. Sodexo, Unilever, Coca-Cola. And we've seen other examples where companies remain in a form of denial. So I think, you know, at the bottom and at the top, there are real challenges. I think the other challenge to corporate leadership, but I won't go there because of time, they are under enormous pressure from financial markets who expect returns from companies which are frankly unsustainable. And I'm sorry, these are two very difficult things to marry together.
Thank you. And Satar, actually the question that Ron raised is one I'd love you to address, which is how in your coaching work can you make managers be more likely to easily recognize or quickly recognize what's going wrong at some part of their organization, and also to correct it and to create a certain culture that minimizes the times when things go wrong?
Well, first of all, thank you to Sodexo and Havas for inviting me to be here. I think first and foremost, it's very important to understand, you know, as a business leader, we, as part of preparation for this panel discussion, I interviewed 15 CEOs, Asian CEOs, who were coaching clients. And the question I asked is, what does quality of life means to you as a business leader, as a CEO or the head of business? And what are you doing right now in your own organization? There are two themes that came up very clearly. One, to many of these business leaders, quality of life, they tend to equate with corporate social responsibility. In many organizations, that's what it means. But we all know from the hearing from this conference, it means more than that. There's so many different dimensions. But this is what most business leaders tend to equate that. But I think the next question I ask is, if that's the case, then what it takes to be a successful business leader or successful organization to be able to be a part of the, you know, this movement, being a good corporate citizen and to implement CSR initiative. I think first and foremost, all of them told me to be able to do that, first and foremost, you must be a very successful organization. You must be profitable. Forget about all this initiative you're talking about if you're not sustainable. Profitability, sustainability is very important. So what it means is that as a leader, we need to ask ourselves, then how do we create a winning organization? How do we create a climate of trust to be able to develop a team of what I call co-leaders, people who work with you closely to create a climate of trust where you can then engage your whole stakeholders, whether they're employees. And to us, when I ask these leaders, and then they say, quality of life means very important thing, two most important stakeholders, our employees and their families. Now, that's very important because if you are not able to help our employees to take care of their families, that's the first and foremost, the most important. You know, this is what we call in our philosophy at CE, we call putting customer first before, putting employee first before customers and profit. So you need to be able to create a climate where people feel engaged, whether, doesn't matter whatever generation. You know, we have done research in Gen Y and Gen Z, which is the latest, was published recently, just those of you interested. Generation Z are those born between 95 to 2010. And look, you compare against the millennial in Asia. And interestingly, they are different, but because of time, I'm not going to go into that. But what I'm going to talk about, irrespective of the different generation, the three things that they look for. They want leaders who are able to inspire them. We want leaders to be able to listen, engage, and coach and guide them. And this is where it's sorely lacking in the workplace today, the quality of leadership. So it starts with, the answer to ask your question is, most important is start with you, self-leadership. So ask yourself, instead of focusing, a lot of us leaders, we tend to focus, yes, our team, our organization, we invest in people development, that's fine. But what have you done for yourself? What have you think about what you need to do differently? Assess yourself. The level of self-awareness in leadership is so sorely lacking. I'm very sad to say this. Yesterday we listened to John. I'm very inspired listening to your presentation and listening to what is lacking, what we call being present. And Arianna, you are absolutely right. And I attend board meetings, and I attend coaching sessions. These are global CEOs who I've been involved in, and some of the regional CEOs in Asia who are based in Singapore, in Malaysia, Singapore, Jakarta. And you're right. And during the meeting, during the coaching session, and they got called from the board, or from one of the global CEO of the board, and they have to disrupt the coaching session just to answer that. I said, look, and I make a policy. I say, I'm sorry. If I can take my time up to be focused with you at that session, you should be able to do that. And that is the same thing you need to do when you're dealing with whether Gen Y or Gen X or your employee. They expect that from the leaders, and that's not happening. And I think that's a good example that you just demonstrated earlier about in your own board meeting. And that is what should be practiced. But the reality is that we are caught up with all this thing that we need to be respond to so many of these expectations. So the question is, leave me one point very important as a leader in quality of life, as a change maker, is about choices. There's no, sorry, I'm going to say this, as a professor, I'm an adjunct professor, to profess is to tell the truth. You don't like what I'm going to say, I'm going to tell you the reality. There's no such thing as work-life balance, so I'm sorry. Sorry, the reality is that you have to make tough choices. And when you are with your family, you are with your family. Focus with your family. I mean, there are times you have to work beyond working hours. You have to work 18, 24 hours for a project where you know you need to get it done. And you have to focus on that. You have to do it simply because that's what it takes to get it done, to be successful. Because, of course, you can get the right people in place, putting the right people in the right job. As Jim Collins talked about, getting the right people on the bus, getting the right people in the right seat, and getting the wrong people off the bus. This is the biggest problem today in organizations because of leaders' inability to get people outside or get them off or to get them out of the organization. Especially leaders who do not know how to use a different style of leadership, the different style which you're required to use. Now, I don't think there's no such thing as you don't use command and control. Yesterday I was listening to some speaker, no, the Gen Y, you need to be more encouraging, more affiliative, more gentle. Rubbish. You need to use all style because there are circumstances. I deal with Gen Y every day. I'm talking to my consultant, my team. And you need to use different style of leadership when the situation warrants it. And sometimes I need to be very tough in my message where I think that it warrants it. And sometimes I need to be, 90% of the time, I need to be more engaging, more coaching, and to get them to be inspired, motivated, and they want to do it not because they have to do it, they want to do it because they believe in you. When they believe in you, and because you lead with passion and purpose, that's where they will do it for you, irrespective of whatever it takes. Whether they have to work 18 hours, 24 hours, they will be there for you. That's very important. Thank you.
Sata also coaches speaking. So if anybody here wants to take it, but you have to have his accent to be even more effective. I'm so glad we have so many people with accents on this panel. I don't feel alone anymore. So, Erica, under your leadership, how is the World Food Programme attempting to eliminate hunger in a different way that includes some of these quality of life considerations?
That's a very good question. Does this work?
Yes.
Yes. Seen from my chair and working with the ultra-poor people of the world, it's quality of life is a whole different perspective. If you're a person who lives on $1 a day or even less, and you have to feed your family, most of your time you will spend finding food for your family. Most of that dollar you will spend buying food or getting food for that family. So quality of life is as you also said, Ron, it's a different kind of thing. So how do we do it? There are, I think, 805 million ultra-poor on this globe who live under those circumstances. So under no circumstances, an agency like the World Food Programme can do that by ourselves. We rely heavily on partners. But back to the people we serve. There are two factors here. One is that we can't do it alone. We need to have the institutions, the organizations, the governments, everybody have to join hands, the corporate business, etc. But one of the main instruments here are the people we serve themselves, the poor people. I think that what I've seen in all the years I've worked in the field is that if you engage those people, all these millions of people, the hundreds of millions of people, each have a name. They're not just a big group in a refugee camp or as you see under the rubbles in Nepal at the moment. Everyone has a face, a name, vision, wishes for how they want to live, what they want to do with their lives. So we need to engage them. And we need to not patronize, but we need to understand how they can change their lives themselves and how we can spend the funds that we have in a way which gives a more long distance and a better future. Of course, we're talking about different stages. If you take Nepal, which is very acute at the moment, we talk life-saving. People have to get safe, they have to get out of the rubble, they have to get clean water, they have to get food and shelter. But after that, we also need to start thinking the rehabilitation. How do we get them back to normal? And this is where they come in, and this is where our partners come in. Let me mention some example where we have used private corporate business. 5 years ago, WFP started thinking about how we procure food. I think last year, just to give you a sense of the magnitude, we bought 2.2 million tons of food global. That's a lot of food. And we started thinking, and we were transporting all this food and storing this food and distributing this food. Then we started thinking about we need to buy this food closer to where our beneficiaries are, to the people we serve, where they are living. And 5 years later now, with the help of private corporate business and the expertise that they have and can give us, we have procured about 140, or we have spent 140 million US dollars in procuring from local smallholder farmers so that we can strengthen their communities and make them more resilient. So my whole point here is that whenever we can, as a humanitarian agency like the World Food Programme, whenever we can, apart from doing all the life-saving stuff, but spend our energy on projects which can help people help themselves. I refuse to use the fishing rod example and not give them fish, give them a fishing rod. Yeah. On the farmers, we've trained more than, I think, 500,000 farmers, of which 200,000 are women farmers, in forming cooperatives in good quality production, and then we have guaranteed a price for them so that we actually buy from them and distribute from them. That helps save lives. That gives them quality of life as well and gives them an ability to get out of the cycle of poverty. We also work with private corporate business, and we have to on several levels. Some we work on using their technology, using their expertise in developing new and more smart food products. It takes a lot to transport millions of tons of foods across the oceans. It takes a lot of energy and fuel and etc. to get it to the high Himalayas, for instance. So what we've done is start producing nutritious food, which we put in small package that we develop them with private corporate business who have the technical expertise and research institutes, and we produce them locally so that we also create work for poor people. And then a packet like this would cost, I think, 30 cents or 25 cents, and it can feed a kid a day and give the calories and the nutrients that a kid needs. So just to say that we can do things in smarter ways, we can involve the poor people in the countries where we work in actually getting in the driver's seats of their own lives. And I think that that's encouraging.
Thank you so much. You know, unfortunately, we have to finish by noon. Is that can I have another 5 minutes? Great. So if we can go to you then and see who has any questions. And again, tell us your name and what you do before you ask the question. Yes.
I could still say good morning to all of you. Thank you for this panel discussion. I have a question, I think, for all 5 of you. I'd like to, if you could respond to my question, please. It's a tremendous effort, and you see a big unbalance now in the distribution of wealth and nutrition and food in the world. Could you please give me the non-political answer about what are the big barriers at the moment to make sure that we are able to do that, given all the new technology that we heard today, and how could we achieve that in order to reach, I think we have a common responsibility for everybody at this world to have quality of life. So what would be the barrier that we need to break, and how can we contribute to that as an individual as we are here sitting together?
So that's a very important question. In the interest of time, why don't we have Ron answer it instead of all of us answering it, and then...
I'm not sure that people will agree I'm speaking on their behalf, so just me. I think, first of all, in terms of global poverty and global inequality, I think we have to fix the world's food system. We have a world's food system which is completely insane. Agriculture is systematically destroyed locally, and then they buy cheap food on the world market. This is unsustainable, and it also, I'm afraid, tends to benefit those that are already better off and completely destroys the capacity of poor people to feed themselves. I mean, I think the comment about how the World Food Programme is looking at this is very, very prevalent. This is an important part of providing food aid. Actually, we should think about a day when we don't have to provide food aid, and building that model would be great. In terms of sort of the world of work, I really think, and I won't repeat, but I really think that if people have access to the rights that they need to sit down with their companies and fight their way to a better living, we can see significant changes in the number of people who are the working poor. You know, in this country, to be frank, there used to be a link between wages and productivity. Mm-hmm. And that's partly one way of describing what is loosely called the American dream. That link was broken. Productivity went up, wages stood still, and that's where the absolutely ridiculous levels of inequality actually come from in this country. Because somebody benefited from those increases in productivity. When wages were linked, you had a sustainable economy because everybody rose. You broke that link, and you won't be surprised to say that I will say that that's somewhere linked between the fact that once 35% of American workers in the private sector were in unions, and now it's down to 6%. You know, you lose that link if you destroy workers' capacity to keep that link. And it is that breaking of the link between wages and productivity in many industrialized countries that has driven up inequality. Clearly, that's a subjective view. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that coming from me. But I think if you look at the facts, there is some evidence to support that view. Thank you.
You want to say something?
Yes. I mean, it's quite clear what we have to do. The question is really the barriers, what makes that difficult. Agriculture is unfortunately the most capital intensive activity of all. When you want to produce a liter of milk, you spend $2 for $1 of sales. When you transform that milk in a yogurt, infant milk, baby food, you spend $0.50 of investment for $1 of sales. The coefficient is 1 to 4 in between upstream activities and downstream. So one thing you have to do first is to be prepared to fund agriculture, to be prepared. What the World Bank is not doing anymore, you know that they have gone down very significantly, and as Ron said, it destroys local agriculture. But it is the most capital intensive. And the most of all, the most capital intensive of all activities is family agriculture, because the scale is such that modernizing is an effort in capital which is extremely difficult for family. So when a corporate, a company like Danone associated with the Mars Group have created recently a fund for family agriculture in developing countries, which is an equity fund. It's a very important initiative. Second remark, so we have solutions, including funding more, involving companies which have an interest in the consistency of the supply chain, in funding upstream, where you have never had the proper injection of capital. Second thing, coalition of players. The corporates cannot work alone. They have to work with NGOs. They have to work with people on the ground in the poorest countries. It cannot be entirely market-oriented. It has to be a combination of not-for-profit work. In my country, I've created a little family foundation because I considered I had a duty, if I want the quality of life to go up, to work with market-oriented firms, coalition of players. I mean, we have some examples of efficiency on the ground at that level. So let's be optimistic. There are ways, and we start to measure the ways, but it has been neglected.
Thank you, Lionel. Is there one last question before we wrap up? Michelle tells me best to move on. So let me just wrap up by saying that, in fact, the question you just raised about growing inequalities is a very, very important question to end with, because I see a very clear connection between the crisis of growing inequalities and what that can lead to, as we've seen from history, and the lack of wisdom among so many of our leaders, which is very, very connected with the lack of their connection to their own inner wisdom from which best decisions are made. And if you look throughout history, you see that the reason so many warning signs were ignored in the past is because of a failure of leadership and imagination. I was in Pompeii recently, and it's quite amazing to look at a completely destroyed city when Vesuvius erupted, and then realize all the warning signs that were ignored. You know, the dogs that had run away, the birds that had stopped singing, not to mention the white smoke bellowing from Mount Vesuvius for years. So in the same way, I think the quality of life issues that we've been discussing here are not a luxury. If we don't address them, we are at the same time endangering our very survival, because we're being led by leaders in politics, in business, in media, who are very smart, with very high IQs, making terrible decisions because they are not addressing their own quality of life issues, and as a result, ignoring the quality of lives of those who work with them. So thank you so much, Sodexo and Havas, for bringing us together and bringing such incredible panelists together to address a really, really important issue. Thank you.